So a huge wave of nostalgia came over the entire country on...
It was a wave of nausea.
Reset. Don't step on me so early with nausea. So a huge wave of nostalgia washed over the entire country on July 27th when millions of people learned that an iconic website from their youth called Nasza Klasa, which is Polish for our class, as in school class, was closing down. This came as a shock, a surprise to many, many people because, well, Nasza Klasa is hard.
They thought it went down years earlier.
Well, there's that too. But if you weren't around in Poland about 10, 15, 20 years ago, it's hard to make you understand just how big Nasza Klasa was. Actually, 20 years ago, no. It only went online in 2006. So let's say 10 to 15 years ago. Nasza Klasa was Facebook before there was Facebook, basically. And that's what we want to talk about today. And also just a discussion of the larger internet culture kind of generally in Poland in the early part of this century. First, Dr. Mike, Josh, let's talk about the end of Nasza Klasa. Dr. Mike, they had excellent timing beating Facebook, but they also had very poor timing because they were only like 18 months or 2 years ahead of
before,
Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook came into Poland. I mean, I had a Nasza Klasa profile as well, but they were extremely limited. You have to remember, like, Nasza Klasa worked because in Poland in high school, it's not like in the US where you go from different class to different class, you have your own schedule. No, it's like when you go to a high school, you're with that group of people for the next 4 years.
Yeah, so you
it's
get to know them really well.
Exactly. And Nasza Klasa showed up and became like an internet version of that. You could go online, say what year you graduated, which class you were in, what school, and then other people who could be all around the country would log in, and you'd get in touch with these people that you hadn't seen for 10, 15 years.
So a way to reconnect.
Exactly. It really appealed to actually a slightly older demographic than what the internet generally appealed to at that time. So, like, teenagers and 20-somethings, they weren't really that interested in connecting with people that they just, saw last year. But all of a sudden, their parents kind of were. So it really exploded in popularity. I signed up for it too, as like 4 or 5 years after graduating from high school. But at the same time, I also already had MySpace and Facebook. And both of those services provided more options for communication, for self-expression, for getting in touch with other people outside of the country. Nasza Klasa was basically like a profile for your class, for your high school, and then like a very slow messaging service.
Well, initially, and by the way, it was founded in Wrocław by 4 university students. Nice backstory to the website. But yeah, initially it was focused, as you say, on school. But over time, it spread out to scout groups and military units and basically anybody who was in a certain group together. And then it expanded even further as just a general social media platform over time. So it did evolve. But yeah, you mentioned that you had your Facebook and MySpace. It's just people didn't have enough, mental bandwidth for multiple accounts to keep track of their friends.
I'll be honest, when Nasza Klasa started, I would use that. Like, I would go to Nasza Klasa and write to these people, "Hey, get on Facebook."
Yeah,
it's an easier way to get in touch with a larger group of people right away to move them over to Facebook. And I remember for the first few months, years, people were like, "Oh, what's Facebook?" Blah, blah, blah. But started using it, they never went back to Nasza Klasa.
It is easy, by the way, to say Facebook was the Nasza Klasa killer, and certainly it was. But also, Nasza Klasa didn't do themselves any favors. They kind of made some missteps business-wise. They kind of monetized in a weird way. They turned a lot of people off with making certain functionalities, premium service, too many advertisements, things like that. So looking back, the founders probably could have done things differently.
We have to also remember these were the early days for internet, like, early 2000s. Well, people really know how to monetize. They had millions of people using it, which was a big deal in Poland at the time. Like, so many users, so many people signed up.
They had like 1/3 of the country had a Nasza Klasa account.
At one point, yeah, which was just,
13, 14 million people.
And they just didn't know how to make money off this because, like, advertisers at this time still didn't really understand the idea of advertising to people online. So it was just basically banner ads or random things thrown out there. So they weren't earning that amount of money. That little bit of money they were making was from advertisements that were basically discouraging people from using the service in the first place, or premium services where people are like, why would I want to pay for this?
Well, it's all very interesting, particularly looked at in the context of, particularly Google and Facebook, because both of those actually, at the outset, it wasn't like, what's the quickest way that we can make money from this? It was rather about what's the best way to get ubiquity, for for us to be necessary, for everyone to use. Google was making no money at all initially. The whole thing with Google Ads and kind of positioned search results and everything like that came along later.
The market share is first.
Yeah. And I mean, they got this, this whole brilliant, really very, very simple landing page. What are you looking for? You just type in what you're looking for and an enter button. That was really, really it. And, other people, Yahoo screwed up, making it too complicated.
Well, that's true,
because
Josh,
there was
too complicated.
I know in the kind of discussions for this show, I mentioned the which I'd actually, because I never signed up for it. In Britain and the US, they had a thing called Friends Reunited, which was a very, very similar thing. It was like, get in touch with your old classmates. And let's not forget, of course, that the origin of the idea of Facebook was based on the idea of a university yearbook, that you can keep in touch with all the people you were at.
Well, that's why I want to stop short of calling Nasza Klasa a copycat site, but it's simply a fact that that the same concept already existed. There was a site in America called classmates.com that was started in 1995. And so it's, this was hardly groundbreaking, but Nasza Klasa was the first to kind of get recognition in the broader market and attract that. It's called a network effect. It's worth more if the people are on the same network, basically. Yeah. So they were the first to be able to establish their name and to get that, what's it called? The critical mass, reach a certain audience that kind of builds on itself. And so you have to give them credit for that.
I mean, there was a lot of websites like that in the late 90s, early 2000s in Poland where they had an idea that might have come from a different country and they were just trying to apply it to the Polish market. I remember one being like in the States and in Europe, there was like hotornot.com. You put up your photo and it would get ranked 1 to 10. And Poland had something similar called Photocopel. It was like you had a bit of a profile and you put up a photo. And that became actually pretty popular like at the turn of the century as well, late 90s, early 2000s. And if you want to actually get in touch with this person, then you have to do the premium service thing. So that's kind of killed it for them.
I see what they did there.
Especially when people like me realized that they were pretty dumb when it came to uploading the photos. So you could go to the photo that was on Photocopel and just look. It was just a connection to a URL from another website. So I would just go to the website of where that photo was, and it was usually like a Yahoo GeoCities website for that person with their email contact information there anyway. So, I think for like a year or two...
Mike, you rascal.
Hot or not did the same thing. Yeah, I was creeping on the internet before people even knew about it, man. I was good. I knew you put something on the internet, I would find you.
So creepy.
Creepy. Set of skills
Before we move on to a larger discussion of the internet culture generally, there's one more... brand name kind of I want to mention that is technically still around. It still exists, but it's nothing like it used to be. There was an instant messaging service in Poland called Gadogado. So what is Gado? Like talk, something like that?
It means like chatty or something like that.
Gadogado was everywhere. And this is something you had to sign up for. You had like a number. And in the
49311.
In the early days of this century, everybody in Poland had a Gadogado account. And if you wanted to hook up online, chat, you just trade your numbers. And that's how you made it a connection. This is before... Again, everybody had Facebook and everybody used Facebook or Instagram.
Before smartphones, really, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. But Gadogado was a cultural phenomenon, just like Nasza Klasa was, Dr. Mike, and now they're both kind of a footnote in history.
The thing is, Gadogado actually, I think, was even bigger, but quieter in that sense, since it just became, you had your email, you had your phone number, and you had your Gadogado number. That was like how you communicated online as well, instant messaging and stuff like that. So in the way you had in the US, AOL Instant Messenger or Yahoo IRC and stuff like that, the one that really dominated in Poland for a good 5, maybe even 10 years was Gadogado. And this was, the way you would chat. The fact that Gadogado, the app or the program, actually also allowed you to send text messages. So, this is at a time when text messages, you had to pay for them. But Gadogado actually had an option where you could text people from Gadogado and people who could text back to your Gadogado right away at one point. So this actually made communicating very easy. And this is like pre-smartphone era. So you could actually get in touch with people through Gadogado online while using your phone. And
for free, by the way.
For free, exactly. The only problem is like the operators would sometimes change the services, how they work. So like it wouldn't work for 2 weeks for this one operator, for the other, and then it would come back. And that kind of probably hurt them as well. But when it came to like chatting, Gadogado was one of the most popular ones. I remember it was also one of the first ones I ever saw where, you put the smiley and it would turn into the emoticon right away. I remember the ones that they would be even animated, so you could have like a little smiley face that would puke. I remember there was a smiley face that, you would type in, I remember it was like sex, something like that. It was just like two emoticons, one on top of the other, humping like doggy style from behind them. When I'm like 17 years old and watching like a 3-frame little GIF moving like that, I thought it was like blew my mind. Like, wow, the internet can do this now.
Technology is wonderful. I can watch an emoticon puke. What a world we live in. Yeah. So you can't talk about the internet culture in Poland in the early 2000s without talking about internet cafes, which we were talking about this earlier, Dr. Mike. We were trying to establish how many internet cafes are left in Krakow. They're not completely gone, but it's nothing like it was 15, 20 years ago.
Well, they were everywhere when I moved here. And then like the early 2000s, the internet actually became popular. This is also like pre-era of mobile internet. So you only had internet when you were home in front of your computer, and internet was expensive. Having a computer was expensive. Yeah. It was slow. It was cumbersome. And you'd send out a couple of emails, go online, and then, you wanted to check those emails, but it might actually make more sense to go to an internet cafe where you paid a couple of zlotys for an hour and go to a computer that was probably better than what you had at home.
Right, exactly.
And you would check what was there waiting for you. Because, instant messaging could actually be, you write something, chat for an hour, then you come back 2 days later and see what they wrote back to you.
Now, you make a good point. We have these cafes here, not just because of the tourism in Krakow, but like you said, people either didn't have a computer at home or the computer they had was extra slow, and it was just more convenient to go to the place around the corner. And these internet cafes were not all in the old town. Of course, many of them were. But even in kind of like, suburban outside of the center locations, there were internet cafes there as well. And it was just simply more convenient. They had a better connection, and it was just a thing. And now it's just gone.
And people would go to game as well online because these computers were better.
Oh yeah, local area networks for Doom and for Quake. I remember vividly in 2000, 2001, 2002, both here, and I can remember being in Kielce at the time as well. And there were these internet cafes. They were 24-hour, and it was paradise for like 14-year-old boys. There was a 24-hour ticket. They would sit there and play overnight. They would just sit there and have these endless Doom and Quake matches. And this is just what people did at that time. This is how people interacted. How they used the net, how they gamed. There was a social aspect to it as well, obviously. And again, that's gone now too. But there was this 10, 15-year period in Poland where a very interesting and unique culture was built around the internet because of these factors that we're talking about.
You remind me, actually, the first apartment that I lived in when I moved here in 2006 was on on Długo up towards the Nowy Klapage end. And I was actually on the top floor of a building, and the ground floor was an internet cafe.
A lot of cafes on Długo, actually.
And so, I move into the apartment, and it's like, I've got to sort out the internet and everything. I'll go and speak to these guys downstairs. And they say, yeah, we sort you out, no problem. And so like, okay. So basically they came up to my flat. They put, I screwed some little socket or whatever into the wall for a Ethernet cable. And then just went over to the window at the back and lobbed this cable out the window. And I was like, welcome to Poland. And, literally it just like went down the outside of the building at the back, and then they plugged it into their, massive, whatever.
No, but yeah, their connections back then were like super fast, blew people's minds, like 512 kilobytes. Oh my God. and that was a big deal when, at home, dial-up barely ever worked,
That was the first time I ever downloaded a film on a torrent as well. I think it was the first Cars movie. It took about 4 days.
Oh man, I remember the time. I remember actually one of the first things I ever tried downloading, this was when I still lived in the States, was like a demo for a game called A10 Cube. It was probably 96, 97. It was probably like 30 or 40 megabytes. I remember dial-up connection. I leave the computer on all night for it to download and, accidentally hit the phone like an hour before it's downloaded. Have to restart the whole thing again. But it was like, and then it finally get the thing you install, it blew my mind. It was like
that funny little clicking sound that you go.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
What year was it when we here in Poland when we finally got reasonably priced mobile internet access?
Mobile internet. Well, it probably started. It started with the smartphone era, because before that
3G.
3G. But for instance, the first it was pre-smartphone, so late 2000s. You could have internet on your phone, but it was checking websites, sending an email. You weren't watching YouTube or anything like that. Right. 2007, 2008.
That's when the BlackBerry was a thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, but you didn't need super fast mobile internet then. Literally having 100 megabytes a month was enough for those kind of services. And then, the first smartphones coming out like late 2000s, 2010 later, the iPhone, first Android phones. And
2008, I think, was the first iPhone.
I got my first iPhone 2010. And at that point, I think the plan I had was like 500 megabytes a month. Or I want to say like 30, 40 zlotys, maybe a little more. It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't super expensive either. And I could go through the 500 megabytes pretty quickly, mainly listening to like streamed radio stations and stuff like that, not watching videos or anything like that. But here the market was a little different because it wasn't that people were using a lot, overpaying, and then they introduced a new plan. It was basically the plans grew in capacity as the needs grew. So within a couple of years, it was normal for people to have a plan that had like 2, 3, 4 gigabytes. Now the plan I have right now is 45 gigabytes for like about 30 zlotys a month, and I don't even use half of that. But 4G LTE, but it's more than enough. I don't even think about. I don't worry about going over my plan or anything like that. It's fantastic. And that's basically what it's been like here for close to like 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, these days when it comes to data packages and speed and just general access compared to the price that we pay, we're okay now. It's almost normal now. However, in the early days of internet access and certainly mobile phone plans, we were ripped off like horribly. I can remember in 1999 and 2000 paying roughly 250 zlotys a month on Idea. Remember the network called Idea? Yeah. For this crap phone. Of course, no internet. This is just for phones and text messages. Remember the days when people would call and your first 3 or 5 seconds were free, I think, and you would like talk really fast and try to get your... We did this. I mean, and just normal, even modest monthly use would cost about $50 to $60 a month. It was outrageous. So now we've almost joined the kind of the normal mainstream. But actually, at that time, it was horrible.
One of the countries with the cheapest rates when it comes to mobile usage and data. Really? It's hard to find.
Doesn't feel that way, but okay.
But weirdly, I mean, it was the United States that kind of lagged virtually the rest of the world when it came to mobile phone technology.
They did it first. They did it worse kind of scenarios, just like the UK was before. Right now, like when I hear about how much my friends in the US pay for their phones, and you're talking about plans that cost $100, $200 for 2 or 3 lines.
That's true.
It's like, are you serious? I'm on a family plan with my parents and a few other people, and it's like 5 lines altogether for like 140 zlotys, something like that, and like 40 gigs each, unlimited text minutes, and internet European calls as well, free. It's just like I don't think about it. It's 30 zlotys.
All the puking emoticons you can watch. Fantastic.
But you're right. Right at the beginning of the day, it was expensive.
It was incredible.
Text messages. First, you get like 10 free a month, then it was like 5 grosses each or something like that, which didn't seem like a lot. But like when text messaging really exploded, like 98, 99, a teenager could send 20 texts. Really simple. All of a sudden, it was like a zloty, and you do that every day. All of a sudden, it's like 50, 60 zlotys extra a month. I remember my dad's finally he switched over to like a different plan that had free text messaging. By that time, I'd switched over to internet messaging as well. It's like, Dad, text messaging is so 1998. I mean,
can you even get a plan these days that doesn't include data? I mean, does anybody have a dumb phone?
Well, actually, I mean, I use Leica Mobile because it's like really cheap, and that you can separate out their packages into like calls and texts only and data only. And in fact, now I've got a kind of like bundled, it's all bundled in together. But previously I had, I think it was like 10 zloty a month for, calls and text messages, and up to a certain limit inclusive. And then I paid 7 zloty a month for 2 gigabytes of internet, relying on the fact that most of the time I'm within range of Wi-Fi, so I don't need to use that.
Well, what are the prepaid options these days? There used to, what was that, what was it called? Heya. Remember Heya?
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't that all prepaid?
They were one of the first big prepaid virtual mobile operators, because you had the big 3 here, which was Idea, which turned into Orange. You had Plus. You had, there was the other one, Era, that turned into T-Mobile.
That's right.
And then you have a lot of the virtual ones. Heya was one of those. Virgin is another one. They had a huge viral ad campaign. Heya, back in the day, spray painting the
big red rubber hand, wasn't it?
All those companies spent a fortune on marketing. I mean, names were everywhere.
Yeah, it's I'm surprised that you're paying some. I mean, I think like Orange has like a plan which is like all inclusive plus like 15 gigs a month for like 20 or 25 zlotys right now.
Oh, well, I'm paying less than that for more. So
more, okay.
I was talking about what I had previously.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'm paying, I think, 20 a month for 45 gigabytes plus unlimited calls and text messages.
Basically
and like
giving it away now.
A big allowance outside of Poland as well.
For them, it's basically, it's dirt cheap right now. So they have to find money to make other ways because people don't want to. This is what I'm so surprised by how much my friends are paying. It's like when I tell them like, oh, I'm paying for what you have for about $10 a month right now.
Let me go back to the internet, Dr. Michael. Put you on the spot here for a moment. Going back to Nasza Klasa, in the early days of this century, there was an atmosphere where 4 students from Wrocław could make a website that just blew up and took Poland by storm. I don't see that happening today. The internet here is much more, professionalized, and all the sites with the most users or subscribers or visitors, they are most associated with news, Gazeta, Interia, Onet, things like that. Can you think of a Polish site that's not news-oriented that has really kind of, punches above its weight and kind of, successful in terms of users?
It's not new, but my first thought there is Allegro. That's started, in early days. It was a kind of clunky and ugly Web 1.0 almost in appearance. It was like a bad eBay, and eBay actually wanted to buy them 1 point for like 30 million or something like that, and they said like, no, we're making a lot of money, we like it, we want to keep building it up. And now they like an IPO a couple of months ago, and they were like one of the most valuable Polish companies, I think at like 19 billion euros or something like that. They're huge, and that's not a news-based service, and that's completely, not only are they actually making money, not just fake internet money kind of, stockholders, but, they're valuable. People love them, and they're fully Polish owned, and they're, actually spreading into other markets down here in Eastern Europe. Amazon is actually having trouble. Amazon now has been in Poland for a couple of months, and it's really not made much of an impact.
Yeah, I don't know how much traction they're getting. Apart from me, I kind of keep them afloat, I think I would. But no, with Allegro, you're right. At the same time, this might be splitting hairs. I don't know how much that Allegro is just the website of a successful Polish company as opposed to a successful Polish website. Do you know what I mean?
Well, the question is now,
kind of the same thing. I know.
It's no longer a website; it's apps. Websites don't matter anymore. A website is just like the business card for an app.
That's true. But I'm just trying to think of a Polish site that just kind of, has gained an impressive user base. And, because these days, once you start attracting an audience, the bigger fish come in and start to buy you up, basically.
Sometimes that's actually the way a lot of companies operate. It's like they start up bringing some users, like sell it for $1 billion, hopefully, as a unicorn within 2 years. Everything I think of like Polish well-known internet properties are from 10, 20 years ago, like Onet, for instance. I think they were bigger back in the day. Now they're still around. I don't know if they got bought out by TVN, or I think they're part of some conglomerate. But
sure they are. Yeah, Interia is
big
as
well. Yeah,
and the other ones like WP.
WP, exactly. That's another one. I had. There was O2 as well. Actually, my dad. I think I still have an email with them. I have to check if it still exists. Oh, that was another like online communicator called Tlen. God, now I'm going back.
Oh yeah, I remember Tlen. Yeah, so it's just like Gadogado, same idea.
Along Gadogados, basically, and I had that as well. And that's like late '90s, early 2000s. But I don't think they survived too long. They became like an email provider, just like Hotmail or something like that, and they just kind of disappeared. They're still around. Somebody owns them, so if you have an email with them that's still active, it's still active.
Well, but if you have had a Nasza Klasa account, it's dead now. Midnight on July 27th, it got shut down. Interestingly enough, apparently they still had traffic. I mean, and not just like 5 people, like, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And I'm curious about at what point when you own a website, if it's just, you're better off just finishing it. It's not monetized. You're getting traffic, but it's not monetized. And instead of just letting it, what's the cost of letting a website survive?
You still have to pay for the servers.
Yeah, how much is that really? I mean,
that can't be a lot of money. If you're talking about, it could be the point where they had hundreds of thousands of users, but they had no ad revenue coming in to pay for the server.
Well, I'm just wondering. Resources. You have a user database, and you have privacy laws and GDPR and all the rest of it, but surely that can be monetized. You sell that to somebody who wants to, send them spam or whatever. There's money to be made when you have addresses. It's worth something.
I don't remember, but I think with Nasza Klasa, I remember reading a story that one of them was like offered 3 million zlotys to sell out. And he's like, no, I'm going to build this up to something. And like, I wonder what he's thinking right now.
Yeah, I probably should have taken the money. Well, That is our trip down memory lane to all the services we used to use to send mail and message and look at dirty pictures and stuff like that. Right, Mike?
Puking emoji.
I have no idea what you're talking about. So, you remember that when you had to actually wait for the photo to load from top to bottom?
I have no idea what you're talking about. I never saw it. No. But you know what? Just very quickly, aren't kids today spoiled? I don't mean like kids. I mean like teenagers, and I mean spoiled like you would not believe. People, you have everything in on your phone. Basically, you get it instantly. It's cheap. God damn it! We're too early. We came along too early for
Actually,
this.
I'm glad because you need a little bit of patience. You need a little bit of time for that gratification there. It's like you need to value
You
it.
can download every movie ever and every song ever and every book ever in a couple of hours. And again, it's in your mobile phone and just.
But for me, it's like with music right now. The fact that you have access to everything makes it even more difficult to
that's
choose.
true.
Before, when you had to choose, pay, and you got it, and that was the only thing you would have until you had enough money and time to get another one, made you value what you got and actually listen to the whole album. Not right now. It's like, I don't like this song. Next song. Next song. Next song. And I've been caught there so many times where
It doesn't mean anything to you.
15 minutes going past one song after another, and don't end up actually listening to anything.
Josh, you and I have talked many times about all the money we spent or maybe wasted on buying music, something that just doesn't happen today.
Yes.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everybody. KrakCast.pl is the site, of course. Please comment, like, share, click, whatever else you do to our stuff.
Check out our Nasza Klasa website.
And and remember, this month in August, we're just posting one episode a week. We'll be back to normal service on at the beginning of September, so you've been warned. Keep it in mind. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the KrakCast.